Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wrestling with Reality podcast. I am your host, Eric Melikian, and today we have a very special guest, someone who's worked in Southern California. He's worked throughout all the Midwest. Longtime wrestling veteran, Zu The Gargoyle. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Sorry, we're getting the interview started a bit late here. We're talking a bit off air, and hopefully we'll get some of these stories on here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? To do an introduction or just do an intro on you, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you broke in professional wrestling.
Okay. So that is a good starting point. So my shoot name or real name is Art Heinrich. Born and raised Niagara Falls, New York. Discovered pro wrestling in 1984. I was at a friend's house and I saw a replay clip of Hulk Hogan versus Iron Sheik for the WWF title when he won it. And I'd never seen pro wrestling before in my life. And I was like, what's this? And then I didn't know Hulk Hogan or what that was. And when I saw that, I was just blown away and fascinated. Never thought I'd become a pro wrestler, but that was and then I had classmates in school who started bringing in wrestling magazines. And I didn't know what those were. And then I became obsessed with that. And then, um, that started me off with the interest. And then I saw this this cassette back when we had VHS video rental stores. My parents took me there and I was looking for the old Coliseum video wrestling videos. And I saw this tape series called Secrets of Pro Wrestling Volume 1 and Volume 2. And it was like this warehouse video where they were revealing how to be a pro wrestler or what the secret.
I remember that
And they
VHS.
were masked, and these guys were like roided up to the hilt, and there was this weird announcer. I swear to God, it must have been Larry Sharp. To this day, I think Larry Sharp was the narrator of the video, but I don't know that to be true. But anyway, that further made me want to do it. And then in fifth grade, my elementary school teacher, Ray Irway, brought in Salvatore Bellomo to speak to our class. And he spoke Italian with one of the girls in our class who was Italian. And I just remember thinking how nice he was and how cool it was to meet a real live pro wrestler. And so that furthered my obsession too. And then I started seeing advertisements for Slammers Wrestling Gym because I had no clue I think maybe I knew about the Monster Factory from the magazines, but I didn't know what that was or how to get there or anything about it. And then Slammers, I saw the ads in like Wrestling World magazine and Pro Wrestling Illustrated and things like that. And so I was 15 at the time. I was 15. I picked up this is back in the day when calling someone, it was long distance and you would pay per minute on a landline. And without telling my mother, I grabbed my phone and I ran into my room and I picked up the phone and called Slammers. And Vern picked up. Vern Langdon, for those that don't know who Vern Langdon is. And he was the owner and proprietor and head trainer at Slammers. And he started talking to me and I was like, I want to come out there and be a pro wrestler. And so he's like, well, how old are you? And I told him, he's like, are your parents there? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, let me talk to your parents. So I ran it and grabbed my mother. She thought it was a prank. She thought I had gotten one of my friends to pull up. She didn't believe that that I was speaking to an actual pro wrestling person, and two, that I had the courage or the chutzpah to actually just up and do it. And then he started sending me programs like this in newsletters.
Wow.
And I was always like, I want to be on the program. I want to be in the newsletter. And he's like, well, if you come out here someday, you will be. And I was like, well, I thought he was full of, nobody's going to put me on a program. But so that's how it started, was me talking to him at 15 and 16 and stuff. And then once I turned it, he would not let me come out till I was 18. So I turned 18. I was enrolled in college at Missouri Western State University. It was called Missouri Western State College then, in St. Joseph, Missouri. And um, I told my parents I wanted to go. I was diagnosed with lupus at the age of 16. So they told me at 17 that I had 10 years to live and I was going to be dead at 27 years old from lupus. So at 18, I was like, well, crap, I need to go out and get all this stuff living done. So I had told Vern that, so he said, well, get a plane ticket out here and we'll get you in the ring. So my stepdad paid for the plane ticket. And and then, of course, my parents had been talking to him at this point for 2 years. So he even sent me the very first Slammers video, which was called the World Class Title Tournament. He sent me that video, and I was obsessed with that and watched that over and over and over again. And I would read the newsletters and read the programs over and over again. And so how I got into wrestling was through a wrestling magazine. That's how I got into wrestling, was because of an advertisement for a pro wrestling school. And I was brave enough to call the number at 16 years old and then hop on a plane to meet somebody I'd never met before in my life, which in hindsight is insane and not safe. But
Close business back then that, that was kind of your only way to get in.
Right. Yeah. No, it was. It wasn't like you could just go to the, drive to Orlando or wherever. No, it was there was like the ones I remember. There was Doug's Gym in Texas that trained people. Johnny Rotz had a school. Larry Sharp had a school, and Vern had a school. I didn't know who Bill Anderson was at the time, and I didn't know who Jesse Hernandez was at the time. But there weren't a lot. It wasn't easy to get into wrestling like it is now. So I hopped on a plane, arrived at LAX. Vern picked me up in his Corvette, which had a license plate that said "Slam Me." And that very same Corvette is the one he taught me to drive in when I was older. But then the next day, he lived in Hollywood Hills. His address was I remember the road. It was Appian Way, and his next door neighbor was Diana Ross and Ice-T. And if you drove down one road, you were in Studio City, and if you drove down another road, you were in Beverly Hills. And I just remember how winding those roads were in the Hollywood Hills area, like and I could, all I thought was, man, if this was ice, we'd be screwed.
Oh yeah. Even during rainstorms, you had to be careful driving those roads.
Right. So yeah, but that's how I broke in was through being bold to call a wrestling to answer an ad, and then to go out there.
So when you broke in at Slammers, around what time frame was this?
December of 1992. My first match was May 16th, 1993 versus Dynamite D at the SWF Arena in Sun Valley, California. And I had a second match that day versus a gentleman named Phil Roeder, who worked as Corporal Punishment. And I worked him. He later dyed his hair black and they called him the Punisher, which is interesting. But yep. So I had two matches my first day, and I thought that was going to be it. And then Vern called me back and said, he called me in later and said, do you want to come back and have another match? Do you want to wrestle again? And I was like, yeah. And then he paid for the plane ticket that time, which was nice. And something I didn't, at the time, I was not realizing how lucky I was, because promoters don't pay for plane tickets half the time on the indies or travel. So yeah, but nope. And then it was, every time I went, it was intense training. And I also didn't realize how lucky I was to have in one-on-one instruction, private instruction with Jeff or Darren or whoever felt like getting in the ring with me. We had Bill Pearl then. We had Samoan Kid, who I met and wrestled a lot, and we had a lot of people. So, and back then, I wasn't even Zu the Gargoyle. I was Sean Sparky Carter, and there's a picture of my smiling face, if you can see that on the SWF program. So
Oh,
I
that's cool.
was a white meat baby face, and he named me Carter after President Jimmy Carter. And because my idea, he told me to come up with a wrestling name when I was a rookie, and mine was Sean Icebreaker North. That was the idea I had, and he didn't like it, and so he ended up calling me Sean Sparky Carter. And then I remember when I came back after my first match, he had done pictures of me, wrestling. And I came back, he's like, I got a surprise for you. Tells me this when I'm over the phone. And I get there and he hands me a magazine. And I open it up and it's got my face. And I hadn't even had a match yet. That was just after, matter of fact, that was after my first trip in December. I hadn't even wrestled Darren yet. And I get there when I come back and I'm already in the mag, and it said, Slam You Hopeful, Sean Sparky Carter. So like I'm in a magazine before I even got a match, and I'm sitting there going, "Holy cow!" Like, and I take it home to my mom and showed her, and so. But yeah, that's how I got in, and it was definitely an adventure. But again, when you think you're going to be dead at 27, you're trying to cram as much life as you can in 10 years.
Yeah.
So
How was the guys you train with? Tell us a little bit about who actually trained you and, how that whole process went.
so day one that I went into Slammers, I started with Vern, and that was an 8-hour day. And he beat the bejesus out of me, and then tried to teach me a bump. The first time I tried to take a bump, I hit the back of my head. And then I did it right the second time because I didn't want to hit my head again. Then day two, I got in the ring with Jeff Lindbergh. And I spent most of the day with him. And then I remember we broke for lunch. We went there in the morning. We broke for lunch. He took me to Webby's. No, yeah, Webby's Deli or something like that in Sun Valley or Studio City, Webby's. And they had really good tuna fish sandwiches, which were delicious. And so we ate at Webby. We got it to go, came back to the office and had lunch, and then got back in the ring for the second 4-hour session.
Wow.
Day three was when I met Darren, and then he trained me. And so, and I was there for a month the first time, and I trained like 8 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, and loved every minute of it. Felt like I was at Disneyland or something. Um, because I hadn't had wrestling before, like I hadn't been in the ring anywhere. I didn't know that ring wasn't I didn't realize that the Slammers ring was super stiff. Like it was a rigid old 1960s ring, and I didn't realize that. So I had nothing to it wasn't until I started wrestling later that I realized that rings didn't have to feel like concrete. But I didn't care. I had a blast. I spent 30 days basically training every day. My first trip.
So wait a minute. When you worked for Slammers throughout your years there, you flew back and forth between California
Mhm.
and the Midwest where you were living?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So I would go there for a month and do it. And back in those days, we only ran once a month. Slammers would run once a month at the SWF Arena. There was a period when we were at Strongbow Stadium where we ran every week, but even then, I'd come in for like 2 shows and then go home. Because I had lupus, the training and the match would take a lot out of me, and I'd go home and rest up. So it would weaken my immune system. I would get sick. I'd go rest up, feel better, and then go back and do it again. And it was actually Slammers wrestling saved my life in that regard, because there was um, a pharmacist in Studio City, a lady pharmacist before the internet. And I told her I had lupus. She goes, "Oh, you got lupus." And she goes, "They've got you on this drug." That she named every drug they had me on. And she's like, "That stuff's going to kill you." And she pulls out these books and starts like making photocopies on a copy machine right in front of me, and starts highlighting stuff she wanted me to read. She grabs samples of all these supplements she wants me to take and writes this stuff down and says, "Go home, throw out your drugs, take these supplements instead, do this, and you'll get better." And I was like, what do I got to lose? So I followed her advice against doctor's orders, and I got better. I went into remission. So
That's great.
it's literally because of wrestling, because of Slammers, that I beat lupus. Now it's not a death sentence, but back in those days, everything you read and every specialist I went to and every doctor I went to said that death. They told my mother to get uh, get my affairs in order and all that stuff. And so I thought I was going to die. So I was like, so that's why I didn't wrestle, move out to California, or train the traditional curriculum, which was 3 times a week, and grunt group I think was on Sundays or Saturdays, and which was the group training. So you'd have like individual training 3 days a week, and then you'd have group training once a week, and then you'd have your match once a month back in those days. So yeah, I was flying back and forth.
Wow. So let me ask you, were they like health supplements you get like at a health food store that you start?
Okay. DHEA, vitamin E, vitamin C. What else did I take? Basically, it was like a lot of vitamins and minerals and amino acids to support your immune system. And then it was also diet, stay out of the sun, things like that, which is probably the reason why I ended up being the gargoyle, was because I had to be pale white anyway. You can't really tan. So we played to my strengths and created a gimmick that a character that would work for my limitations instead of against them, which kind of disappointed me, because I would idolize Darren and wanted to be Dynamite D's twin or tag team partner. Hence Sparky. It was like Vern's little way to, you had Dynamite and then you had the Spark. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it never worked. But yeah, so yes, to answer your question, they were supplements and whatnot, and they worked. So
Your story is very remarkable, and I think it shows your perseverance and your internal toughness that I think probably set you apart from everybody else that you were either training alongside or, you were a pupil of.
maybe I enjoyed training with them. There's parts of my childhood growing up where, not to get too dark or down or deep, but I was physically abused by my stepdad. And he was a Vietnam War vet, but he was also a pro boxer. So he would like punch me.
Oh,
And I had my first concussion, not from wrestling, but from my stepdad. And so that also toughened me up, but it also gave me this like anger in my stomach, which made me it made me an angry young person, a teenager. But what that did was it made me resistant to bullying, or like, the hazing that they do in wrestling when you're back in those days. I was very resistant to it. And so if one of the boys tried to take liberties on me, the moment that it was my turn to give a receipt, oh, I laid it in. Like, all right, we can fight. Like, sure, that's what we're doing. I'd rather not. It's a lot easier on the body to go light and work, but I wasn't afraid of the pain because of my childhood. So,
Well, even if
yeah,
you do pro wrestling the correct way, even if you take it, you work with somebody, I mean, it's hard on the body, period.
it is. But to that point, and I don't mean to fast forward or jump around, but my easiest match I ever had in my life, Darren, myself, and a gentleman named Jesse Bain, who wrestled as Tyrone Tiny Little at Slammers and wrestled as Sybil at XPW. One of my favorite
Jess
people
Willow.
in, yeah, he's my favorite people in pro wrestling
Oh, one of
ever.
the nicest guys you'll ever meet.
I love Jesse. I miss him. I wish I could keep in contact with him. I'm sad that I lost contact with him, but oh my God. Um, so we all go on a road trip because they had never, this was 1997, and Darren and Jesse had never wrestled in the Midwest. And I got them booked in Wichita, I got them booked in St. Louis, and I got them booked in Paducah, Kentucky for Tony Falk. And Ashley was working down there too. So we got to, it was kind of a Slammers reunion because we all got to see Ashley.
That's great.
And they put me in the main event. Again, you talk about showing up at the venue, not knowing what you're doing. So we show up and we get booked in matches. And they put me in the main event that night, and against Ben Jordan, who had wrestled for Global Wrestling Federation in Dallas. And he used to work their light heavyweight division against X-Pac, or Sean Waltman, and Jerry Lynn and all those guys. He was in that little circle of people. So anyway, I'm working this tag team match, and it was the first time in wrestling I realized wrestling could be light, like really light, like because that Memphis style is just, oh my God, like I was like, holy cow. And after that experience, I didn't want to wrestle stiff ever again. And I would get angry about it if somebody stiffed me, because once my eyes were open that I could work light, and the only thing that would hurt would be the gravity and the bumps and not all of it. Oh my God. I was like, hell yeah, let's do some light wrestling. Uh yeah. And I didn't sweat. I didn't break a sweat. I didn't blow up. I didn't breathe heavy. I was like, and we wrestled, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes that match. And it was the easiest match I ever had in my life. I loved it. To this day, that's literally the easiest match I ever had in my life. And I had wished, that's the one thing I wish I could have had more of those, you know. But nah, I just,
Sounds like Slammers just prepared you for
mhm.
your whole future in professional wrestling.
Oh yeah, yeah, it did. It not in a paint by numbers way. And I mean that because I hear these stories, and I have friends who own wrestling schools and train people. And now it's much more okay to get there, you do this and you do that, and there's this formula and the etiquette. Like everything with Slammers was like almost like a Mr. Miyagi type of, Karate Kid type of way, where you would do a thing and not know why you're doing a thing, but then when you're out on the road, it made sense, and then the light bulb started going off. Even with character development or marketing, or the only thing and I blame this on myself more than anything. And again, I didn't get the traditional sit at Slammers and uh, do the traditional program. I was fly in, fly out, fly in, fly out. But the only thing I never really got from Slammers that I wish I'd gotten was pro wrestling etiquette, backstage politics, backstage etiquette. That was a harder lesson for me to pick up. But no, I the the lessons I got from Slammers were really, like, yeah, like every one of you talk to any of us, we're all happy because we were tough. Most, yeah, I even Jeff. Like Jeff was probably the lightest one we had there. And I wish I had wrestled him. But
Well, it's funny. Jeff was on one of our earlier podcasts, and he says he worked pretty snug. Okay.
not compared to him and Darren worked a little snug, but you compare them to Mike, Ombre, Billy, and maybe there's a difference between, no, there is. There's definitely a difference between snug and stiff. They worked believably snug, but not in a way that hurt you. Um, Ombre and Mike and Edgar and Billy worked a way that was sometimes unsafe, in my opinion. And that's, again, it's not a slight to them. I think that you got to remember at that time, ECW was really popular and all that stuff was really big. So I think it was just like, no matter how far you are in wrestling, until you get to television wrestling and you've been doing that for a while, like national television wrestling, you see it and you want to get there. So you're emulating what you see on TV. Even if you're trying to be original, you're still picking apart and it affects you. So, like, Ombre was a huge fan of Pancrase. Before MMA, there was Pancration, and that was his, like, he was obsessed with that. Like, and so the few lessons I had with him, he always wanted to like shoot wrestle with me, and I just wasn't interested in that. I was interested in learning how to do, because I was like, he'd put me in a move and say wrestle out of this, and I had some amateur wrestling, so I just wouldn't let him put me in the move. And he'd be like, no, 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 let me put you in this. No, I don't. If we're fighting for real, I'm not going to get near you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you put me in the move. Why would I do that? That's dumb. But no, yeah, Slammers definitely toughened us up. Like, I was talking to Chris Stone, who wrestled as Joy Boy. There's a guy if you ever want to talk to, too. He's from Slammers and wrestled as he wrestled for us as Joy Boy, and then he later on went and trained with Boogie Woogie Jimmy Valiant and moved to South Carolina and wrestled as Scar Stevens, which was a gimmick I gave him, a name I gave him. But he was my tag team partner, me and him at Slammers. And yeah, we were just talking yesterday. Yesterday we were talking about it, and he was grateful of the how tough, the toughness that we developed because of Slammers and how it protected us out on the road, for sure. Yeah.
Now, is it cool if I offshoot some names from Slammers that you possibly either interacted with, worked with, or trained with?
Sure.
I'm gonna Joe Kimball, aka the Mad Dog, aka Pero Russo.
So I don't know him as Pero Russo. I know him as Joe Kimball. What's fascinating, so I never worked him, and we passed, like, so his time at Slammers was kind of brief compared to mine. And I say that because I started in 92 and didn't leave till 97. And Joe came in, did his training, and then left and went out. Like, he wasn't a long time Slammers guy. He was a guy who paid his money, did his training, and then went out wrestling. And what I remember about Joe was he was the first person, and again, nothing I say is meant to disparage. It's just an observation. First thing I remember about Joe Kimball when I met him was how much acne he had all over his body. And I didn't know at the time that meant steroids. But, and he was the second. I never met Walking Weapon Ben Peller, who was at Slammers too, but I never met him. But Ben did steroids too, but didn't have, and I found that out later, but he didn't have the acne all over his body. Joe was the first person I ever saw in my life in person that had acne from steroid use. And, but I was like, God, he's like, you compared him to Darren and he was much bigger. And then years later, I saw him and I don't know what he got, but man, he got way bigger than he ever was at Slammers. And then I found out that he was instructing people at the Ultimate Pro Wrestling school.
With Rick Bassman's?
Yeah, yeah. And had a hand with the guys that were like John Cena and Samoa Joe and some other guys that were there. I think Joe.
See him with Tim Fisher? Because I know Tim. I remember going to shows when John Cena started out, and he'd wrestle Tim, which is known to most people as Damian Steele. It'd be me and two of my friends showing up on a Friday night to see the two of them put on.
So you know how I know Tim Fisher? I know Tim Fisher as Buddy the Body West. That's how I know him. And I remember when he first came in, and then when that changed, he was Nick Beat, and then he became Damian Steele. But yes, I remember Joe Kimball from, and again, I never did a show with him. I just remember him from, uh, and I didn't even have a training session, like a grunt group or a training session with him. I did, but I do. I'm familiar with him. I know who he is, but we never met.
Referee Danny Ramirez.
One of my favorite referees in the history. There's only one other referee that I think was better than him, and that's a referee from the Midwest named his wrestling name was Johnny Rockahara. His referee name was Johnny Rockahara. His real name is John Dobson. He's one of my favorite people, and it makes me sad that he never got an opportunity to go to WWF or WWE and be a referee, because I think Danny, like Danny Ramirez, to me was one of the best referees ever. Like, it's sad that he didn't get an opportunity to go to WWF or WCW or whatever, but man, heck of a referee. And then what I didn't know, and I never saw it, but I heard that he used to get in the ring and train to wrestle. Like, he would get, before he was a referee, he wanted to be a wrestler, and he would get in the ring and bounce around and do stuff. And he was, one day I saw him do like I think it's called a tope, where you go through the top and middle rope.
Yeah.
I saw him do that, just goofing off. And I was like, what the heck? Referees don't do topes, you know? And, but yeah, he's an amazing, and I haven't seen him in years, but like, I always thought he was one of the best referees in California, period. Like, honest to God, I think this may offend some people. I think he was better than Patrick Hernandez. I think
Really?
in his prime, I think Patrick Hernandez is not as good as Danny. And I don't mean that to be like, Pat's good. I just think, for my money, I think Danny's the best referee that ever came out of Slammers in the history of Slammers.
Boy, because I've worked alongside Patrick. I consider him one of my biggest mentors. Like, I always wanted to be a combo of him and Mike Chioda.
I've known Patrick since he was like 16. Like, I've known him forever. But yeah, he used to before he was reffing. Like, he was a just a helping out with the show kind of kid. I've known him since he was a kid. I've known Kevin Kleinrock since he was young and wanted to be a promoter. And yeah, I've known, but no, I'm not. And again, that's just my own preference. But I think Danny was my favorite referee in all of California.
You know, it's funny talking about getting a chance. Patrick, we had him as our first official guest on the podcast, and he was telling us that he actually did a couple of the original Funkin' Dojo camps that Kurt Angle came out of, the Hardys, Edge and Christian, Val Venus.
Oh, Rod Big Guns Cannon trained there, one of Slammers wrestler. Rodney Blackbeard's his real name. He was in that same. If you go and find, there's an old WWF magazine image of the Funkin' Dojo when it was in the bowels of Titan Towers in Connecticut, in Stamford, and it had Edge, it had Val Venus, it had Mark Henry, it had and Tom Pritchard and Dory Funk and Rod Big Guns Cannon, Rodney Blackbeard, who was from London and then Canada, who literally came to Slammers, paid his money, did his entire. This guy, Rod, trained at Slammers for like 2 weeks, but he trained 7 days a week. It was a 30 lesson course back then, and he did it all in 2 weeks, like just insane, because he didn't have much time on his visa. So he came in, did his training, and then went back.
Wow.
And he then later went to the Hearts back when Bruce Hart was running it. And he said to Vern that the training at Slammers was better than Bruce Hart's training.
Wow.
And Rod was big. Rod was like 6, which was not normal for Slam. Most of Slammers guys were under 6 feet tall. The average Slammers trainee, if you were 6 foot, you were tall at Slam. Rod was like 6'5", the big tall guy.
You know, it's funny. I was going to actually ask you about him because I know which magazine you're talking about. And I want to say Patrick was involved in those original camps too. He was the only referee they flew out from California because, Bruce Pritchard, Pat Patterson, Jeff Jarrett, and a couple guys took a major liking to Patrick.
Why didn't he go anywhere then? Like, what happened with
I don't know exactly what happened. I know if you know Patrick, Patrick's a very humble guy, and sometimes in this business, unfortunately, people consider that either weakness or, in my opinion, or
yeah, you got to have kind of
I think he's big on his family. He's big on just it's a tough road to do all that travel. I don't think people realize how tough professional wrestling.
300 days a year. Yeah, no, that's insane. And I'm not even talking about the in-ring stuff. Just getting on the plane, getting that. I mean, and coordinating the hotel and the food and the like. No, but yeah, that's. I didn't realize Patrick had been around because again, I didn't run into him much, but I didn't realize Patrick had been around. That would put him involved with Slammers 89, 90, somewhere around there. Like he was there. No, huh?
He was there at the beginning, essentially.
Pretty well. The first person to walk through the door was Jeff. That I do know. Jeff was the first person. Um, and then I know that Ombre was there early. Edgar was there early, and Simone Kidd was there early. Simone Kidd came and then left, and then came back. And when he came back is when I ran into him. But shoot, I didn't meet Patrick. You know what's funny is I never got to have Patrick as a referee at Slammers. I got a guy named Dan Farron, and then I got
very good friend. Yeah.
Yep, I got Dan Farron. He was my first referee ever, and then I got Danny, and I always preferred Danny over Dan, only because Danny was communicated a little bit better and was a little bit quicker, like quicker with counts, quicker with whatnot. But I didn't know until years later that Dan Farron had been involved with wrestling before Slammers. I thought he was a Slammers trainee, like the rest of us. I didn't realize that Dan had been involved with wrestling prior to Slammers until much, 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 much later. But I never did get Patrick as a ref, which is kind of, that would have been cool. But so maybe that's where my bias comes from, is a lack of experience. But I mean, I had to admire him. He was always like involved in something and refereeing everywhere for everybody. So I think he even did the Super Indie Pro Wrestling Gorilla and some other guys. Like he did a lot of stuff. So
he's done a lot of stuff. I think Patrick could still add a lot to the business, even at the WWE level. I think he's the perfect guy who stayed humble throughout the years. I think he's somebody who would be a great,
and he's still he's younger than me,
like a great concierge for the company.
He's younger than me, and I'm 49, so he's younger than that, right?
No, Patrick's a little north of you.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that. So then he probably was there before me. Shoot. I never did cross paths with him until later. I didn't know he was older than me. But I remember him. I never got to, the only referee that besides him and Dan, later on we had this guy, real name David Getz, wrestled for us as El Spiritu, and I think he later wrestled as Chaos One or something like that. But he was a smaller guy. David Geck?
Yeah, there we go. I know David. He was kind of on his way out when I was coming in.
Yeah, and he reffed, and I got to have him as a referee when he reffed. And then there was another gentleman named what was his real name? He wrestled for us as Jesus Zapata, was the name Vern gave him. And then he was Dan the Man something for SCCW.
Oh, yeah, I know Dan.
Dan something. I don't remember his last name, and I feel bad.
Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago.
Which is terrible. I did hear that, and I got to wrestle him a few times, but he also refereed a little bit too. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, my favorite referee of my time at Slammers was Danny, all the time. I didn't know he was even Danny back then. I always called him Jackie, but yeah, he was definitely one of my favorite people for sure
Well,
as far
speaking
as refs go.
of Rodney Blackbeard, do you know whatever happened to him? I know there's I've heard a little bit of conflicting info about that he had a contract with WWE briefly, at least a developmental deal, but something fell sideways and he kind of just disappeared after that.
Uh, no, I know that he moved back to. I thought he either moved back to Toronto or moved back to England. I know he lived in Canada. Um, I also remember that he came back to Slammers as the Egyptian magician. He had shaved his head bald and he had lost some weight and leaned up. And he had like a couple matches with Ashley Hudson and a couple matches with this gentleman we had there who was an ex football player named Apollo, whose real name was Mike Smith. Um, but I don't know what happened with. I never even got to work a show with Rodney because again, he came and went. Like he came in, did his shows, did his training, and was off to the races. So I never got to interact with him. But I think from what I've heard through the grapevine, I think he either moved back to Toronto or moved back to Canada or moved back to England. But yep.
Yeah, he had a very fascinating look that kind of just, I think, would grab people. And I heard he was a good talker too.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I heard.
I'm going to bring up the Tim Fisher, aka Damian Steele, someone we are desperately hoping to get on the podcast in the future.
Are you guys dudes? Does anyone know where he's at? Like the
You know what? We'll talk a little off air about it.
okay,
He kind
sure.
of stays incognito a lot. So,
Yeah, I hope he's okay for real. Like, um, in all sincerity, I hope he's all right. But my earliest memory of him was I thought he had a really good build, and I thought he had an interesting look. And he also was a musician. He gave me a copy of the CD he had put out um, of a ska band he was in called 6 Feet Deep, and I still have that CD, and I still listen to it every. And there was a song on there called Papa Shango, and it was just a ska song about Papa Shango. So um, I never had a match with him. We were never put into a match. We might have. It is possible that we were once in a tag match together, like a 6-man tag or something like that, or a battle royal or something. But we never really crossed paths. We never wrestled. Um, but um, I was happy for him. I'd heard he had a tour in Puerto Rico and done some stuff. I think he did a few matches with WWF. I don't know that to be true,
yeah,
but
he actually had matches with Cena where Cena got signed through
oh
that.
wow, that's good. Um, but yeah, I don't. I remember he also taught. I think he taught at the Ultimate Pro Wrestling Rick Bassman School.
Yes, he
Um,
did.
and he. I mean, for a gentleman, for a guy who, because all of us didn't like, even at Slammers, like a lot, like there are some schools or some trainers or some places you go where it's like a pipeline. Like when you went to OVW, you were almost guaranteed to get looked at. And if you went to the power plant, you were almost guaranteed to get looked at. But if you went to a school that wasn't a feeder system, it was harder to make those connections unless somebody wanted you to, you know? And yet, so Tim, I thought did pretty good for himself considering it was harder for him to make waves, you know?
Absolutely. I only
So
been around him a couple times, but seemed like a very professional, nice guy.
mhm.
But I noticed he kind of viewed this as a business and
Yep.
he was close with Darren, Patrick Hernandez, and a couple other guys, but he kind of stuck to himself a lot.
Yes, that is true. And he was the first wrestler I met that I was around that smoked cigarettes. And I thought, how could you go out and smoke cigarettes and still wrestle? I always thought that was weird. I didn't smoke, but yeah, I remember he drank coffee and smoked cigarettes. And, but he always had like, you talk about him be like, you remember those poofy 80s ring jackets that the wrestlers would wear that had like the rhinestones or had the fancy stuff, like kind of like
Like
well,
Recruit and
but no, more like the Young Stallions, like Paul Roma,
oh
and
yeah.
he had a ring jacket like that when he was Buddy the Body West, and I was so jealous of that freaking jacket because it just looked immaculate. It looked like, like a professional's ring jacket. And so I was impressed with that. And I think it even said the body on the back or something like that. It had some type of thing. But, and I remember it was red because Vern would assign you colors for your outfits. And his color was red, and like he wore a red and black scheme. But yeah, Tim he was tan. Back in those days, he had short hair and, a clean look and looked like a professional wrestler. I always thought, Yeah,
He was
I remember Tim.
instrumental in,
Buddy,
having a hand training in some big names.
yeah, yeah, and he had some good matches at XP. I mean, as far as I know, he had some good matches with XPW in
I
Puerto
mean,
Rico.
honestly, him and Darren were always my favorites. I wasn't as huge into the hardcore wrestling like some people were, and I thought him and Darren were at least two guys to me that I thought were like, wow, these guys are workers and can do
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I remember Tim Fisher. Tim, like I said, I still have his CD.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
Going to bring up another name that you don't hear much about, but was a very instrumental part into Slammers. And I know there's some controversy with other SoCal wrestlers concerning him. El Toro Bravo.
Okay, so maybe you can educate me. Why is there controversies with other SoCal wrestlers around around El Toro Bravo?
I don't know. I've been told some things, and we could talk about it off
Okay,
air.
yeah, that's fascinating. Wow.
I don't want to spread anything, but
Sure.
a
No,
lot of
but
guys
no. What do
closer
I
to
know?
Darren than they were with him,
Mhm.
and I know he was very much a Vern guy. And
Yes. Okay, so I can speak on that. That I can speak on. So and I don't want to, I'm sure that this has been talked about before. There was this thing called, so in 1997, uh, there was a split between, so Darren and movie star Malicious Mike, and some other guys had stopped wrestling for Slammers, and they either wanted to, like, a bunch of the half of the Slammers guys wanted to leave and do their own thing, or they wanted Vern to let them have more freedom with their show. And his argument and stance was, it's my money, it's my show. If you're working for me, you do what I say. And their stance was, no, we want to do our own thing. And Darren was running his own training group. So Vern and Edgar and I think Carlos were training the main core guys at Slammers at this time. And then there were guys that were training both with the main Slammers group, and then we're behind Vern's back, training with Darren and his group because they enjoyed it more. As far as I know. But getting back to that, then they did this thing called DWO, which Kevin Kleinrock will tell you it's Dynamite. It was Dynamite Wrestling Organization. I have a T-shirt somewhere in storage, and it's a bomb, like a black bomb logo, and it says DWO, Dynamite Wrestling Organization. What a lot of people don't know is it was Darren, myself, and Jesse Bain that came up with that name. We were in Wichita, Kansas, and it was a pun on the NWO. And Darren loved puns. I don't know if people know that about him, but he loved really bad jokes, and that's something he and I had in common.
Yeah, absolutely did.
Darren's favorite bad joke that I remember to this day was, you know what the first guy said to the second guy? Hey.
That sounds like a joke Darren would say if you knew
him. And so we came up with that on a road trip. with the DWO thing. Now the logo and all that stuff, nothing to do with that, but the name Dynamite Wrestling, and the idea behind Dynamite Wrestling Organization was we didn't know much about intellectual property and all that, but we were terrified of getting sued by WCW. So that's why it was done. It wasn't Dynamite World Order. It was Dynamite Wrestling Organization, to not get sued by WCW. But if you find the shirts or the logos, it said DWO, was drawn by Tone Rodriguez, who's an artist and a friend of Carlos's. And if you find that, he drew the logo, and then it was Dynamite Wrestling Organization. But we did this thing. We had shirts printed up and everything, or Darren did, and we did it. It was in Sherman Oaks Center for Rich Studies. And during intermission is when we all jumped in the ring, and I broke kayfabe as the Gargoyle for the first time, and I was Team Darren too. Well, what I didn't know behind the scenes was that Edgar was funding money, like helping to pay for the shows, and was part owner or whatever, like he was wanting to take it over. But Edgar was super loyal to Vern. I mean, like to the death. Like he's super, super loyal, and loved Vern and respected Vern, and saw the DWO and all that stuff as a betrayal. Like not a betrayal like you brats, but like a vendetta type betrayal. He didn't seem to care for it. And so Vern and I had a falling out because of the DWO in 97. We didn't speak again until 2003. And
Years.
yeah. And so when I started hanging out with Vern again, Edgar was not a fan. He was not happy. And was mad at Vern for bringing me back into his life. Edgar, the only match interaction I ever had with it, I never wrestled Edgar, except for one time we were in a battle royal, and that was it. But Edgar was a Vern. As much as I was talking about how, so Billy Messiah was a Carlos student, an Hombre de Oro student. Edgar was a Vern student. I mean, he had went on the road. He left Slammers. What people don't realize is Edgar left Slammers early on and went with Bill Anderson. And
I didn't know that. I heard recently that he did a lot of the Steve Gatorwolf tour shows.
That was because of Bill Anderson. Edgar, Jolton Jason Shane, I want to say Ebony Blade, and Walking Weapon Ben Peller all left Slammers in the late 80s, early 90s. I want to say early 90s, before I got there, and they went with Bill. Bill got kicked out of Slammers. He was running his school out of Slammers. He got kicked out of Slammers because Louis Spicoli stole a phone number to an actress out of Vern's Rolodex. And when Vern confronted Bill and confronted Louis lied about it. And then also, so anyway, Bill will tell you he left. Vern said that he got kicked out. But anyway, so then Bill opened his own school and went, and Edgar and them, and that's how Edgar got hired that's through Bill. Edgar got to go wrestle for WWF a few times.
Oh, I didn't know El Toro Bravo did stuff for the WWF.
Mm-hmm. He wrestled the Steiners. He wrestled a few people. Yeah. Edgar wrestled. He wrestled for WWF.
No, I don't want to act like I'm, disparaging him, because I've never met him. I've only heard a couple things. I mean, I'd love to have him on the podcast and have him tell his story and maybe clear up any misconceptions. And I'm glad you were able to help with that.
Like I said, he doesn't. I don't think he's a fan of mine. And I have nothing personally against the guy. We didn't always see eye to eye, because I was more of I was a mix of Vern and Darren. I liked them both, and I understood both their point of views, but I was definitely a mix. But um, yeah, and I was there when Vern passed away. I was in his house, and I was the one that discovered he passed away. Now
Hear about that.
the Hollywood version of this story is that it was his neighbor that discovered he passed away because his ex-wife did not like the fact that there was a lot of things about Vern that she didn't like, and I'm not going to get into that. But what I will say is that, uh, yeah, I was there when Vern passed away in Mesa, Arizona. Uh, the actual time that I discovered him was around 1 o'clock in the morning uh, on New Year's, the day after New Year's Day. But if you go to um, Wikipedia, it'll tell you that he passed away at 8 p.m. on New Year's Day. That's not true. I called Jeff was the first person I called, Jeff Lindbergh, and he can confirm that story. But no, I was there. I discovered him. I spent 19 hours on the phone with his friends. I was there when the coroner came and got Vern's body and put it on a gurney. They dropped his body and then picked it up and put it on the gurney. I was there for that, and then I called Dawn and I called everybody, and that was me. I'm the one that made all the phone calls, and then Dawn and her husband Brent were his estate lawyers, and then they handled all the affairs afterwards. But that was me, not his neighbors.
Is it true El Toro Bravo owns everything that's related?
Correct. He does. That was a problem I had when Kevin Kleinrock released the Slammers Buddies and all that crap. I don't mean to disparage Kevin, but like he had no permission to do that. That wasn't authorized. That was bootleg. And I remember he put Pete Hatfield as one of the Slammers legends, and I was like, Pete was not a legend of Slammers. He was not a Slammers star. He was a guy who didn't even complete his training. I mean, not at Slammers, not through the Slammers curriculum. I have a diploma from Slammers. I'm a Slammers graduate, SlamU graduate. Pete was not. So I was frustrated that Kevin chose certain people to be. Now, Hombre de Oro, Bruce Bodine, Dynamite D. I was like, where's Jeff Lindbergh? Where's all the main stars? Where's Zu the Gargoyle? If you're gonna have I mean, not to toot my own horn, but if you're gonna have a star of Slammers, national magazine before Ed Ferrara became the biggest thing from Slammers, I was the one that was in all the magazines. And I'm not saying that to brag. That's what Vern wanted. He was his company, and he's the one that put me in the magazines. So, if you're going to represent a cast of characters that's supposed to represent those guys, why did Pete Hatfield get a figure and Zu the Gargoyle didn't? Tell me how that makes sense.
Well, and I remember you. I was a preteen. I saw you in all the magazines, Wrestling World,
Mhm.
Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and all its offshoots. Like
I was named the
Jeff Lindbergh were like the biggest names in there.
Yeah, and Pro Wrestling Illustrated had this article of if you think Kane's ugly, this is when Kane shaved his head. Check out these guys. And they listed the 10 ugliest wrestlers in pro wrestling history in no particular order. So everyone was considered equally ugly. And I was on that list. And people made fun of me for it. And I was like, well, and again, this is pre-internet. I was like, but what have you been named on the top 10 anything list?
It's true.
I mean, has Ed Ferrara been named the top 10 booker in pro wrestling history? Name anybody else from Slammers who was named on the top 10 anything list in pro wrestling history. You can't. And I'm not saying that again, it's a goofy thing to be, but my point being that was my niche that was the thing I was good at was doing gimmicks, was doing characters. That was the thing. I wasn't the greatest technician, and I wasn't the tallest, and I wasn't the most athletic, and I didn't have the best body, and I didn't have anything else, but I could do a gimmick. I was good at that, you know. I mean, I could wrestle, but I'm not Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, you know. But
Well, it's like Darren even said one time, this is something I got early on. I didn't break in with Darren. I broke in with a local guy named Alex Knight
I
who,
know Alex Knight. I had a conversation with him. AIWA. Yeah, I know
yeah,
Alex
he's the
Knight.
guy who broke me in.
I know Alex Knight. Yeah, he was supposed to. I was gonna go. Darren went to work for him as Rock Wilder.
Yes, he did.
And then Bill Judd, another Slammers guy, worked for him as Beautiful Jack Stud. And I always thought it was weird that that Bill carried that like stick with the skull on it. I was like, what's that got to do with being beautiful? It just seemed like a weird prop. But no, I remember Alex Knight, Los Angeles shows. Yeah.
Yeah, still talk to him occasionally. He's, still goes to Cauliflower every year here in Vegas. So I always meet up with him when he comes out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. See, wrestling's small. Yeah, that's cool.
And that's how I met Darren, actually, was through him, because Alex was, of course, not working anymore. And he said, you know what? He goes, I should introduce you to him. Like, he's someone you want to, try to, because I was a referee. I trained with Alex to wrestle, but I refereed, and he introduced me to Darren. And, he says, this is someone who could in real time show you the ropes and can better.
No, Darren, like I said, Darren was one of the best technicians I've ever seen. I don't think he gets enough credit. Like, I remember when I first saw Joey Chaos, I thought, and it's weird because Darren didn't really train him, like start him out.
No, my good friends Rick Sadist and Rob Courtney, who wrestled as Craze, were the ones that broke him and Lester in.
Right. Yeah. And back then he was like Chaos One or Chaos or Kid Chaos or something. But I remember him, and I remember when he grew his hair out and how much he reminded me of Darren at that point. But his mannerisms and his in the face. Remember when he had the blonde hair?
Yeah.
I thought he would look like a young athletic version of Edgar of El Toro Bravo. I thought they had similar facial features, but he was like what I thought Edgar would look like if he were a movie star. But
yeah, I could see that resemblance. Of course. Yeah.
That's what I thought when the very first time I saw him at XPW when he had that TV title or whatever he had. I thought he looked like Edgar, but with blonde hair and better, like cleaner. Like Edgar always looked like a rough barroom brawler. But yeah, that's what I thought. Yep. That's wild. Alex Knight. Jesus. Yeah.
He's one of the old guys that go back to, he worked the Olympic Auditorium days. He broke in with the Guerreros back in El Paso. And
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. Alex Knight. Yeah. That's wild, man. That's cool.
Yeah. Do you know him well?
No, like I said, I had one phone conversation with him.
Okay.
And he was honest. He was like, I can't pay anything. I can't. Darren gave me his number, as a matter of fact. I think. I want to say that's right. But yeah. I just wanted to go wrestle someplace other than Slammers at the time. I was bored wrestling. I had wrestled everybody at Slammers, and that's why I started branching out. Because
it's funny. Jeff, when he came on the podcast, said he wrestled a few shows for Alex, but he had to do it under a hood because he was still working for Vern at the time.
Yep. He told me that story too. Which I thought was funny.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And it's funny because I talked to Alex, and it took him a while to remember who Jeff was.
Yeah. Well, when you're promoting for as long as he did, and you've had so many people come in and they do shots, they do spots, and maybe for that person, it's like it's an important thing. But if that person's not a regular part of your promotion and not factored in, yeah, you may not remember them.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things too, and this is something Jeff said when he was on our podcast. Back then, it was hard to get booked on a show. There wasn't, 20 different shows in your city at that time.
Vern didn't teach us either, flat out, because Vern's approach was, I want you to wrestle for me. I want to build you up as exclusive characters. And his counter was, he's like, every other independent show, you go to that show and you see the same 5 guys or the same 10 guys on every Southern California show. And he's like, but if you want to see Zu the Gargoyle, you want to see Jeff Lindbergh, you want to see Dynamite D, you want to see El Toro Bravo, you have to go to a Slammer show to see them. So, and I kind of agree with that because it made it so that you couldn't see us anywhere else. And at the night of the DWO, Vern was working on a Brazilian tour for us, and he had a Cirque du Soleil Vegas show that he was going to set up for us, and a TV show, and a cartoon, and all kinds of crap. And when we did the DWO thing, he pulled the plug on all of it. So we screwed ourselves out of a bunch of merchandising and stuff that would have made us a lot of money. But yes, back to your original question. Edgar RC owns everything Slammers. Which Dawn, his bride, Vern and Dawn were married, but his ex-wife, his attorney, when he passed away, one of the first things she said was to ask me was, who owns Slammers? I said, Edgar. He owns it. It's sitting in storage.
Well, I had saw a post, I guess there's like a Slammers group on Facebook.
Mhm.
And I saw something that either Ron Rivera or Kevin Kleinrock posted up about some stuff being sold in an estate sale from the original Slammer stuff that was.
That's possible. That's possible. I don't know. All I have is my few. I have all the tapes. I have the magazine that I was in. Got that. I have the original 1-year anniversary invite, or the grand opening invite of Slammers.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I got that. I have the photos that I like when I wanted to be in Slammers. I sent Vern pictures to say, hey, I want to go to Slammers. This is the like that, and because I bought Speedos. That. And then this is a picture of me, Jeff, me, Darren, and Tyrone Tiny Little in St. Louis on the road.
Wow.
Here's here's Darren and Tyrone Tiny Little as a tag team in Wichita.
That's pretty cool.
Here's Darren and Ashley Hudson. This was in Paducah, Kentucky, backstage. Here's Ashley Hudson and me backstage, Paducah, Kentucky.
Ashley Hudson was a pretty big guy.
Oh yeah, 6'2", 6'3". And then here's Darren outside my house with the rental car that we got. So yeah, no, I have my memories. That's all I've got. I don't have any, that and a little bit of stuff. But
well, before we move on from Slammers, I do want to bring up, you brought up, you were heavily featured in all the magazines back in the day. Did you get any interest or talk from either WCW, ECW, or the WWF at the time, or did you talk?
That's interesting. Here, the only story I have about that, and it has nothing to do with them, but they were do you remember the Dungeon of Doom storyline?
Yes, right in the mid-90s.
I had called Bill Apter. I used to call the magazines and talk to the like Bill Apter and Stu Sachs and Brandy Mankiewicz and all those people, and bug them. And Bill had gave me the number to WCW to try to get booked for the Dungeon of Doom, because he thought the Gargoyle would have been a perfect character for that, and a perfect fit. And this was before it was on TV, before anybody knew about it. And he's like, hey, they're getting ready to do this Dungeon of Doom thing, and I think you'd be great. And I never went because I knew I couldn't handle the road schedule, because I would do a match, and again, I'd be sick from lupus for like a month. So I was like, there's no way I can do 100 nights a year, 200 nights a year, 300 nights a year. So it wasn't. I found out later, because do you know Rudy Boy Gonzalez?
I have heard of him. We had Dusty Wolf on our podcast a couple.
I like Dusty. Dusty Wolf is a good guy. I like him. I've been on shows with him, and I like him a lot. Um, so Rudy Boy is the guy who was the head trainer and took over Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy, the Texas Wrestling Academy. And what the only reason why I bring is I'm not trying to name drop, but the only thing I'm bringing up is I reached out to him just to say hi, and and he asked me who I was, and when I explained that I was the Gargoyle, he's like, "I've heard of you." And what's fascinating about that is that one time Rudy was kind of a scout for WWE and all that stuff, or at least, had connections with them. And it was just weird to me that anybody in the industry was paying attention to me at all. Like, because I just saw myself as like a kid trying to fulfill his dream, not anybody. I mean, it was neat to be in the magazines, but I mean, it never really paid the bills. Most money I ever made in wrestling was towards the end of my career in Amarillo, Texas. But it was I found out later that if I had been more aggressive or been more active in pursuing that I would have had the opportunities to do so. I just didn't believe in myself, and I was pretty confident I couldn't handle the schedule, that I wouldn't have made it 6 months. So it just didn't seem like a smart idea.
Well, you were dealing with factors possibly that you just had no control over.
Right, and now WWE has, like, all these doctors and stuff, and you can't even work for them without
Yeah.
passing physicals and all that, so, mm, I was pretty confident I wouldn't be able to handle the rigors of the pro wrestling lifestyle, and I didn't do drugs, and a lot of those guys did drugs, and that would have made me even worse, like, more sick, and I'm not saying that to even pick on the guys who did somas or did whatever, but my immune system was already compromised. That would have tore me down even more. So I was like, yeah, I'm not cut out for this pro wrestling, 300 nights a year type of deal. So
It's
I knew,
it's a rough lifestyle.
yeah, absolutely. So I was like, no, I enjoyed the weekend warrior playing wrestling guy. That was a lot more fun for me based on my limitations and what I knew I could do and couldn't do.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's, probably smart to view things that way because it's really hard. I mean, to be at an elite level doing this for any length of period of time to make this your sole focus, it's like winning the lotto. There's only so many people that could say they could retire from this and make a good living.
Even if you get like back in those days, like 5 years was like Vern used to tell me that like the average wrestler lasted 5 years in the big leagues, like 5 years. And I don't care unless let's say I had went and done 5 years in WCW, lighter work schedule. Even then I would have made what, 75,000 a year, maybe 100,000 a year, maybe 200,000 a year for 5 years. That's not enough to be rich off of when you got to pay for your own expenses, pay taxes, pay whatever. Let's say I made 200 grand a year for 5 years, and after taxes and living expenses, I got to sock away $20,000 for 5 years. Okay, I got 100 grand. Big deal. Whoopee. Now I got to do conventions. I don't know. I'm glad I didn't go down that road. You know, I would have loved to teach, or that would have been neat. I always like helping people. So, but then the few times I have trained people, I don't have patience for the same type of immaturity that I had when I was young. I don't have the patience as an older guy for their immaturity. But
I hear you. It's tough. I mean, I know people that are still in the business, and a lot of them do it with kind of almost before they go to a show or before they have a training session, and they're like, oh, they're kind of regretting it even before it happens. That
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah. But yeah. So what other names did you want to run by me?
Well, you know what? One last one who kind of made a name for himself, the Messiah.
Oh yeah, Billy. Yep. Iron Mike Earhart. That was his name at Slammers. And he was 18. I saw an interview that he did years ago where he was like, they had me in a gay homo gimmick. No, we didn't. No, we didn't. Billy was the all-American teenage boy who had a body and wore the blue trunks, the blue knee pads, and the black boots. And all the girls, the little teenage girls, were obsessed with him. He was the teenage heartthrob type character that, the baby face that all the girls wanted to adore and love. And nah, Billy was not. There was nothing gay. The only I'll say it just because it always made me laugh. I don't know why, but Billy used to get an erection when he would wrestle, and it would be weird. And I didn't even know. So I'm sorry. We had a match in Strongwell Stadium, and at the end of this match, we actually got wrote up a review in Wrestling World Magazine for this match when it went on tape, and they gave us 3.5 stars, which for a gargoyle match was like through the roof. Like that was a high match because I was not known for, because even if I can do, say, a Hurricane Rana, Zu the Gargoyle couldn't do a Hurricane Rana. So I didn't do a Hurricane Rana because Zu the Gargoyle couldn't do a Hurricane. It didn't make sense. But so we're wrestling, and I decided to break out of my mold, and I did a sharpshooter on him. And because I did a sharpshooter, we got 3.5 stars. And anyway, at the end of this match, we taped him. It's kind of foreshadowing because he was called the Messiah. We crucified him to the we taped one wrist to one rope, top rope, and one wrist to the other top rope. And then the whole shtick was me and Joy Boy were beating him up and punching on him. And then we took his boot off. And because the gargoyle was obsessed with feet, I bit his feet. And then I was supposed to hawk a loogie on his stomach and then lick it back out of his navel because it was supposed to be gross and scary. So I do all the things I'm instructed to do for this sequence of events. And in those days, we would take the hard, like this was real film, and we would take it to a video editing place in Canoga Park or somewhere, and we would edit these to make the videos, like really make. And then I remember the place about this video place. It was a porn. They did porn video editing there too.
It probably was Canoga Park then, yeah.
So we're in a booth and we're editing this video system, right? The video thing, and you can hear porn videos being edited like 3 or 4 booths down. And it was just the weirdest thing to me as a 20-year-old kid hearing this. But back to the spot, while we're video editing this match, we noticed that Billy has a heart on. And then we noticed that my mouth is not too far from, it's kind of like the Hulk Hogan Ultimate Warrior match where they got the test of strength and Warrior's head is down or whatever, and he's doing this, and it looks kind of suspicious because of that. It was that similar type of thing, and I just laughed. And so when Billy said they had me in a gay homo gimmick, the only thing that was gay homo was the fact that you were wrestling with a boner every match. But no, Billy was he was this, like, Jeff was the original heartthrob of Slammers, like all the girls liked him. And then Billy was supposed to be the new heartthrob. Like all the girls thought he was attractive and he had a little muscular body and all that. So that comment made me giggle every time I saw it. But as far as a guy, I thought Billy was a solid kid. I didn't know much about him. I wrestled him a lot. Because there was one match in Sherman Oaks where, to get his revenge for us taking off his boot, he hit me and Joy Boy with a steel chair and was supposed to knock us out, take off our boots, put my foot in Joy Boy's face and Joy Boy's foot in my face. And when we wake up, we each thought we had Messiah's foot in our mouth. And so we're chewing away. And then, oh, look, we don't really have his foot. Well, when he did this, I think he was really mad about that prior match or something, because he hit Kris with a steel chair and knocked him out for real. And he went to hit me and I put my hand up because I was like, I saw what happened to him. And he hit my hand so hard that I had a bruise on my hand and thumb from being hit with this steel chair. And now what I know about CTE and concussions, I'm so glad I protected my head because it was bad enough as it was. But Billy was Iron Mike Earhart. As Iron Mike Earhart, uh, he was the next baby face. That's what Vern was trying to build him to be, the good guy, heartthrob, all American boy, that the girls liked. That was what I remember from Billy. I never saw him as I thought it was messed up what happened to him in XPW, and I thought it was wrong, and I thought it was a nightmare. But and I would have never, if I had been at XPW when that happened, I would have never went to work for XPW after that. That would have been enough for me. But anybody, whether nah, you don't cut off somebody's thumb.
Well, and it's one of those things. Most of the guys that were in XPW want to have nothing to do with it now.
Yeah, not me. I'm glad I didn't go. I'm glad I didn't. Stayed in the Midwest and wrestled. I wrestled when they did the resurgence of NWA, when they had all those little like territories like National NWA Midwest. I wrestled for the Ed Schumann's Midwest shows and NWA Kansas and NWA Missouri, and we talked about states. I wrestled in my career. I wrestled in 10 states. I wrestled in 10 states for like 30 some promotions, like all over 10 different states. My last state I wrestled in was South Dakota, but that was in 2012. So 19 years of getting bumped around and all that. But you mentioned slammers and all that. Do you remember that Sam Houston was associated with slammers at some point?
Yes, and one of the original guests we had when we started this podcast, we had
Darren McBee
on.
And he was a private student of Sam's.
Yeah, and Darren was the assistant instructor.
Darren, Sam, and Bill Pearl also helped. But I was on a show doing this new gimmick that Vern and I had come up with called Pinky LaRue, and I was in Amarillo, and Sam was on this show wrestling Ted DiBiase's kid, Mike DiBiase. And they wanted me to do a run-in and as a heel and beat up on Sam. So I did, and I hit him snug, but in a safe place between his shoulder blades. And he comes to the back and he goes, "Who hit me? Who hit me like that? Who hit me?" And I was like, "That was me." And he goes, "That's the way you're supposed to hit. All the rest of you are pussies. That's the way you're supposed to hit." And then he goes, "Hey, man, who trained you?" And I told him, and he goes, "Bullshit." And I was like, "No, that's who trained me." And he goes, "Bullshit." So Vern was alive, and I had his number, and I called him on the phone. And Vern and Sam talked. And after that, Sam liked me. But yeah, it's interesting because I had one interaction, one show with Sam Houston, and I did a run in and hit him and be solid enough that he was proud of me and told Vern that he liked me. But yeah.
It's
and
great.
when I told you I made the most money in Amarillo, that's because I used to wrestle there once a week, every week. And this is how I made money. The pay was decent. I mean, it was okay. They put us up in a hotel, gave us money. But how I made extra money was I would buy gear from Adrian Street's wife off of eBay for like say I bought a pair of trunks for $20 and you needed trunks. I would sell them to you for 40. And I told the boys, I told everybody backstage, "Hey, look, you can buy gear from Linda. You can get it this way. And you don't have to pay $40. You can pay $20. And they're like, "No, Pinky, it's fine. We'll just buy it from you." So I would legit come home with $250 of gear money in my pocket.
Wow.
Once. So I did a year like that, and I made $1,000 a month in extra income. And that's the most money I've ever made in wrestling. Was selling Adrian Street's wife's gear.
You need to have a side hustle,
And I told him, I told Linda what I was doing. I was like, "Hey, I'm buying your gear and I'm selling it at markup."
So you know what? That doesn't make you a carny. You were straight up about everything.
Oh yeah.
But
No,
hey,
I wasn't good
for convenience, here you go.
I was gonna told them straight. I even tried to give them like I tried to tell them because a lot of the boys didn't have gear. They would wrestle in t-shirts and shorts or whatever, and that used to piss me off. So I would try to get them gear so they look more professional, and then I'd ask them what they wanted, and I'd try to get something like that. But I was like, you can get custom gear and you can get this, and I was trying to educate them. I would even try to, one of the things that frustrates me about modern wrestling is nobody knows how to tie their boots anymore. Dynamite D taught me how to properly tie my boots, and he learned that from Sam Houston. And so to this day, if I'm backstage and I see somebody with crappy looking boots, I try to educate them on how to tie their boots. And getting back to Rudy Boy Gonzalez, he's like, you should film that, put it on YouTube, and charge $25.
You should, yeah.
But I just think it's knowledge that people should have. When you see somebody on pay-per-view and they don't know how to tie their boots, you're like, what the hell? Like, ugh, I don't know. I learned aesthetics and I learned the proper way to do things from Slammers and from Darren and Vern. So it just frustrates me when I see it wrong, incorrect. But yep.
Well,
Yeah.
tell us a bit about Pinky LaRue.
Okay.
You said that did start at Slammers, right?
Not at Slammers. So Slammers was closed. I used to go and hang out with Vern because he would fly me in just to hang out. And so I'd go hang out with Vern, and it got me away from the Midwest, and I'd go hang out in Montecito and then later Carpinteria. And he was living in Carpinteria, California at the time. And he's like, I got this because people were tired of the Gargoyle. It had ran its course, and also I had built up the gimmick, and it was a name on the indies, and they just wanted to bring me in to lose all the time. And I was like, I don't mind losing, but if I'm going to lose, I'm losing equity in this gimmick every time you have me lose all the time to your no name guy who nobody knows. And that's fine, but let me be something else. If I'm going to lose, let me be Art. Let me be mask guy number 5, I don't mind. I didn't have an ego about losing or winning. I lost more than I won, and I actually enjoyed losing because it was harder. I enjoyed getting guys over, but let me do it not with the equity that I built up on this special character.
Absolutely.
That's the only thing Edgar doesn't own. He doesn't own Zu the Gargoyle. That's mine, and I actually own it. So we were talking about Pinky LaRue, and Vern's like, I got this idea for Pinky. We're going to call it Pinky. And he didn't have a last name. He was just going to call it Pinky. And he wanted me to shave my eyebrows, shave my face, and just have long black hair and kind of look like Marilyn Manson. And it was going to be more of a goth thing. And what happened was I went down to Amarillo for the very first time. And I had been talking with my friends about my wrestling friends from the Midwest about Eric Woodard, who owns his own wrestling company. He was actually one of the people. I didn't train him, but I assisted in training him in the basics. And now he's actually dating my second ex-wife, and they have a wrestling company together. So that's very wrestling, called Traditional American Pro Wrestling in near Junction City, Kansas. But Eric and I were on the road, and we were on the road with this other friend of mine who owns his own wrestling company called Midwest Wrestling Association. No, Midwest Wrestling Alliance in the Omaha area. His name is Brian Blade, and he promotes all over. Like he literally promotes in Nebraska and in Iowa and in Illinois and Ohio and like 6, 7 states. Anyway, with 3 of us in our car, we're talking about it, and they're like, you should try that Pinky gimmick because I hadn't done it yet. And I was like, all right. And then Vern and I, we would get these things where we would get pissed at each other and fight and not speak for a while, and then we'd say I'm sorry and be fine. And so as a rib, I was going to call the character Pinky Langdon. And but it was based on and then I didn't like the goth thing. I didn't want to do it that way. I was more inspired by Adrian Street and also the character of Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show. I wanted to do that. So I did that, and I was at first Pinky Langdon, but then on the way back, my friend Brian could not remember the Langdon. It just, for some reason, his brain was not latching on to Langdon. So he kept calling me Pinky LaRue, Pinky LaRue. And I'd correct him. It's Pinky Langdon, Pinky LaRue. No, it's Pinky Langdon. And he would, no, it's Pinky LaRue. And so I was like, you know what? I'm sick of fighting you. It's Pinky LaRue. And then I spelled it LARUE. And I found out later that French, LaRue in French means the street. And since I was inspired by Adrian Street, I went with Pinky the Street, Pinky LaRue. And then I later ended up having his wife make the gear for me. And I got his permission to blatantly rip him off as much as I wanted. Like, he's like, mate, I'm not doing anything with it anymore. Go ahead and, do it. So I had, like, Adrian Street and I used to, he was another mentor of mine in wrestling by phone. He would give me all kinds of advice, like spend 4 hours on the phone with me. And that's very generous for a name wrestler to spend, just talk to you, a legend, to spend 4 hours on the phone,
Oh yeah.
3 hours, And Adrian was very generous with his time that way. And his wife was very generous. She was, so that's how I got the name. And I debuted it in Amarillo, Texas for a company called West Texas Wrestling Association. And the first time I wrestled my friend Brian Blade, who I'd never wrestled before. And we had a really nice match. No, that's incorrect. I apologize. The first match was against the promoter's son. And he wanted to give me a pedigree, and I didn't know him, so I wasn't taking a pedigree. But that led to, I did such a good performance, and people were impressed that led to long-term bookings. I had a nice 2-year run in Amarillo. And when I say nice run, like, I would go down, we'd leave on a Friday, we'd wrestle a show on Friday in Amarillo, wrestle a show on Saturday in Amarillo, and then Sunday in Oklahoma City. So I would do 3 shows a week, which is a lot for a kid who could only at one point do one show every 3 months. Yeah, Amarillo I loved wrestling in Amarillo. I enjoyed it. It was probably my favorite. California and Amarillo are my 2 favorite places I've ever wrestled in my life. Yeah, Amarillo, Texas, and Southern California, mainly Sun Valley, Sherman Oaks, Bakersfield, and I did do one show. I did the debut show, not the debut show. I did a show for SCCW in Echo Park, California, at a Boys and Girls Club, and then I did one show for Jesse Hernandez and one show for a promoter named Joe Romano, who had trained with Bill Anderson when he was a teen and also tried to train at Slammers. Joe Romano ran a show at Strongbow Stadium. Well, and I did one show, a spot show for him. So, but primarily my wrestling experience in California was Slammers. And then Amarillo was Pinky LaRue. And then I did Pinky LaRue. My last match in South Dakota was as Pinky LaRue. That's how I ended my career.
How long did you do the Pinky LaRue character?
I did Pinky LaRue from 2007 until 2012, so for 5 years. And the fascinating thing about that, it's the only other gimmick. So we talked about aftermags earlier. I was in the PWI 500 list twice as Zu The Gargoyle, and then I was in the PWI 500 once as Pinky LaRue.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
were you the Gargoyle up to 2007?
I was the Gargoyle from 95 until 2003.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then from 2003 to 2007, I bounced around with a bunch of different characters, mainly Sean North. And I just did like the serious wrestler guy in that. And the Brian Blade guy, what was fascinating about the transition to Pinky LaRue was we did this. He concocted this because we had local access TV, and he concocted this idea to where we were kind of making fun of how Vince would say you don't have it, or that so and so has it, that charisma or that intangible spark. So we made fun of it, and the promoter was like, you don't have it. And I'm like, well, what is it? He's like, I don't know, I can't describe it, but you got to find it. So what we did was to transition from Sean North to Pinky LaRue was I kept doing different gimmicks every week, and I would wrestle a match, and he'd be like, "Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it." And I mean, I was punning, I was cosplaying, I cosplayed John Cena and called myself Sean See Me. And the whole match, I would like, "You can't see me," and then do a move. "You can't see me," do another move. And then I cosplayed as Samoa Sean instead of Samoa Joe. I cosplayed as the Sean Key Tonk Man, and just a bunch of different lead ups to Pinky LaRue. And then I did Pinky LaRue, and he was like, "That's it, you have it." And so I was Pinky LaRue for his company, but I was doing Pinky LaRue and Amarillo prior to that. But yep, I did Zu the Gargoyle. I did Sparky Carter from my debut in '93 till '95. Then I did Zu the Gargoyle from '95 to 2003. I did Sean North and various other gimmicks from 2003 to 2007, and then from 2007, January of 2007 till May of 2012, I was Pinky LaRue. Nope, that's not true. Towards the very last end of my matches, I was trying to get away from Pinky in this one company, and I was wrestling as Sean Langdon, and it was because Vern had passed away. I was trying to do a tribute to Vern and do Sean Langdon, and Sean Langdon was from Slammer's Wrestling Gym. So I ended my career actually as the same way I started, as a Sean named character, straight lace character from Slammers.
Paying homage.
Yes.
Now, did you work any big names along the way? Like, after WCW closed, there was an influx of name stars, I'm sure, that were on the indies.
The only big name I've ever been in a match with was Kamala. And I was in a mask, and goes to do a splash on me, and he went to hit me over the head, but because I had this goofy mask on, I couldn't see, and he was so light, which if anyone's watching, they don't know what light means. It means that he hit me, but it didn't really hurt in the same way that a real strike would hurt, a real hit. But he was so light with me that because I couldn't see perfectly, I didn't see the blow and I didn't feel it. And he goes, "You got to sell, baby." I was like, "Hit me again." So he hits me again, and then I bump for him. But I couldn't see it, so I didn't feel it, and I didn't know it. Which the lessons with Vern and with Darren was, hit hard in safe places and hit so that they know, so that they don't have to take their own bump. But he hit me so soft. When he splashed me, I thought I was going to die because he didn't hurt me, but I thought he was going to, because he was like 6'6" or 6'7" and like 300 plus pounds or whatever he was. And I thought I was going to die. I thought, "Oh my God, Kamala's going to kill me and I'm going to die right here." And it was this beautiful. It was awesome. But yeah, Kamala is the only one I wasn't a wrestler that a lot of people wanted to book against names. They would bring me in to lose to their guys, or to wrestle their guys, or to win against their guys, or whatever. I was a mid-carder. I had some main events, but mainly a mid-card wrestler.
Well, and hey, you know what? It's especially once you get in the business, you realize how hard it is. Like guys like Barry Horowitz, Dusty Wolf, I go
Mhm.
on and on. It is truly hard to be good at putting people over. Like people very much underestimate.
Oh, it's easy to lose. It's not easy to lose in a way that advances the person who's winning, in a way that propels them or makes them look good. Um, that's hard, in a convincing way. Um, yeah, but yeah, no. So yeah, Kamala is the only person I wrestled, and I didn't technically wrestle him. What it was I was his manager. I was Kim Chi for a day, and uh, there was a dispute between Kamala and the promoter. Kamala didn't want to lose to the promoter, who was the star, and the promoter didn't want to lose to Kamala. So they concocted this idea where I would get in the ring as his manager to try to do a run in, and then Kamala would get confused, beat me up, and then after he splashed me, the promoter would put a sharpshooter on me, and I would tap out, and then Kamala would lose. He would win, and it was a weird finish. Um, but and that actually killed the town that promoter that building, that town. It killed the town because the fans were so mad about that ending. But that's how I ended up being in the ring and being involved with Kamala. I was his manager as Kimchi, and then I got beat up by him. But
Still cool nonetheless, and great experience.
yeah, yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was fun.
Before we wrap up, I'm just amazed that an hour and 40 minutes went by so quickly. I'd like to close this out and have you talk maybe just a little bit about Darren and how you found out about his passing, and just, how you still fondly remember him, and basically what advice can you pass on to others that he gave you.
Okay, so um, we'll start with when I found out that he passed. I remember he passed in 2007, May of 2007, I want to say, or somewhere around there in 2007. No, it wasn't May. I think it was March or April, but it was 2007. I remember that vividly because I was actually on the road on the way to a wrestling show, and I got a phone call from Jeff or Vern or somebody called me and told me he passed away. And that was rough. And I wasn't able to make it to his funeral, but we did 10 bell salutes. Every show I went to, I made him do a 10 bell salute for Darren.
That's great.
Um, as far as advice, Darren never gave me a whole lot of advice, to be honest. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging to his memory. He taught me a lot of in-ring stuff. And I mean, he taught me the beginner stages. And again, remember, I wasn't there for the traditional Slammers program where I was there 3 days a week and on the grunt groups. And, I was the fly in, stay for a month and go home guy. So in that regard, I learned most of my information about wrestling from Vern. Um, Darren was somebody I looked up to because I wanted to be built like him. I wanted to be as technical as he was. I wanted to have long hair like he had, and I just wanted to be as far as from an in-ring technician, I thought nobody was better on the planet than him. And so I wanted to emulate that skill. I thought he was better that from a TV wrestling standpoint, I thought Malicious Mike was our best TV style wrestler. But from a technical standpoint, from like any move that could be, the only move I never saw Darren do that I knew he couldn't do was a moonsault. But Darren could do everything else. Like he had amazing maneuvers. Like that one move that Rob Van Dam used to do where he would be in the corner and he would jump up from the bottom of the corner and then perch himself on the top rope. First person I saw do that was Darren ever. And we at Slammers, our ropes were super loose, and he was doing it on crappy super loose ropes, not even on a nice ring. Um, everything I learned from Darren was from an in-ring standpoint, um, and just studying him. And I would study him. I would study his moves. I would study his body mannerisms. We disagreed with, like, I didn't sell as the same way that he sold. That's something that I didn't necessarily agree with. But from a movement standpoint, a technical standpoint, a pick a move and he can do it standpoint, I didn't find me somebody in wrestling and I'm not talking about flippity flop. I'm not talking about, um, you know, doing stunts. I'm talking about and it making sense. Like, because Darren would do a high spot, but he wouldn't do a high spot just to do a high spot. It had to make sense. He still wanted to make it look like it was a fight, like a
Yeah,
athletic competition.
did.
Whereas the Young Bucks, or somebody like that in AEW or whatever's hot now. I watched the clips of those matches, and it's let's see, let's do a stunt for the sake of doing a stunt. Darren's moves made sense. It was this to this to this to this to the objective of winning the match. And so I studied that, and I thought I enjoyed that. Darren was, I mean, maybe, you find somebody like a Kurt Angle who knew more about amateur wrestling, or you find somebody, but no, I mean, what, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart? I mean, they're better, maybe, but god dang. And this is what people don't know about Darren. Yes, he had Moolah and Terry Funk and Sam Houston and all these people that came in that Vern brought in to work out with Jeff and Darren when they were new, when they were young rookies. But Jeff and Darren learned more from Jeff and Darren than they learned from anybody else, because they were in the ring with each other more than they were in the ring with anybody else, and they taught each other. I mean, of course, yeah, they learned the fundamentals from Vern, and then they learned from all the people Vern had. They had access to Roddy Piper, whoever came to Slammers got in the ring with them. All of them, all the legends. Like when I heard about in the Midwest, do you remember when Dory Funk had his school in Florida?
Yes.
Right, and he would sell these seminars where you'd go for like a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
There was a few guys from the Midwest who went down there, and they were bragging about how they learned from Dory Funk. And I was like, I learned from a Funk too. Well, who'd you learn from? Terry Funk. He developed our training course. There's no Slammers without, like, it was Moolah, it was Terry Funk, and it was Sam Houston. So we got the value of that education too. And Darren and Jeff are the foundation of Darren, Jeff, and Vern. I would say Vern because I learned the most from him as far as the wrestling business goes and that aspect of it. But those three are the pillars of Slammers. Like, they're the reason, Yeah, Darren, I idolized Darren. He was one of my favorite. There's a song by Blind Melon called No Rain or something like that. And the first time I heard that song, Darren had a Toyota Tacoma pickup truck. And I used to ride with him around in it. And that song came on the radio, and we both started trying to high pitch sing it like the lead singer of that guy. And now I can't hear that song without thinking of Darren. And then now, because I'm getting older and sentimental, I tear up. But yeah, Darren I worshiped him. That's who Darren was to me. He was my first wrestling hero, as far as in person. I mean, like somebody that I knew. I wanted to be Darren, but I wasn't. And I never would have been that. I never would have picked up as much of the athleticism aspect of it. I do think I was better at gimmicks than Darren. That was my strong suit. I could do gimmicks better. But wrestling? Technician? Who did it better than Darren?
Yeah, he's up there, I'd say, with Bret Hart, easily.
Easily. I think he's better than everybody talks about the Young Bucks. I think Darren's better than the Young Bucks.
Oh, without question.
Flat
I mean,
out.
Jim Cornette would even tell you that, because I know Jim Cornette thought very highly of Darren too.
Yeah, I think Darren was head and shoulder, and everybody's on their. I think Darren was a better wrestler than Kenny Omega.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Because I think Kenny Omega doesn't understand the work. Like, Kenny Omega's too busy trying to wrestle Japanese style wrestling. The wrestling that Dave Meltzer likes. Speaking of Dave Meltzer, do you know that do you remember Greg Holzer? Do you know who that is?
Glitzy Greg?
Yeah. So Greg Holzer was a pun on. Vern created Greg Holzer to make fun of Dave Meltzer, the character. That was a dig at Dave. Vern hated Dave Meltzer. Before it was cool to hate Dave Meltzer, Vern hated Dave Meltzer because he thought he exposed the business, and he hated that. Yeah. So before it was cool, I think Darren was a more complete wrestler than Kenny Omega.
I'd agree. Would it safe to be say if Darren was still around today, do you think maybe if given the right opportunity, he'd be a coach at the Performance Center?
Yeah. If Ace Steel was, why wouldn't he be? Ace
Or
Steel's
if
there.
Steve Carino is, or I could
No,
Matt
but I mean,
head
like
trainer.
I speak on that because I know Ace Steel. I know Chris Guy. I know him. I've been in the ring. I've trained with him. So at the Kansas City Monster Factory in Blue Springs, I've trained with Chris. Before there was a CM Punk. Well, before CM Punk was trained by Chris, but I've known Chris since 1995, and Darren's every bit as good as Chris is. I think Chris is one of the few guys that's as good as Darren. And it's funny because they're both short, similar stature. It's except Ace went heavy on the weightlifting, we'll say. But I think, yeah, you asked if Darren were alive, could he have gotten a job there? Yeah, especially if he had the connections in the business. Why not? Yes.
Well, I know at one point, because Darren told me this maybe a year or so before he passed away, that UPW, Rick Bassman, really wanted him to go over there and be one of his lead trainers.
Oh, Darren was head and shoulders above. The only thing that I think Darren missed or needed to be taught was how to do WWE TV wrestling. And if he had picked up that piece and understood that intricately, like the formula, I think Darren would have been unstoppable as a trainer, as a wrestler, as
an agent.
Jesus, forget it. No, I mean, why not? And Jeff too. If Jeff had the opportunities, why not?
Yeah, he had the size.
Jeff just needed to put on some mass.
Yeah.
That's all he needed. And heck, he was built like Kendall Windham. I mean, he could. No, they're in a different world. And then Jeff tells me the last time I talked to Jeff, he's like, he always talks about having one more match and he wants to have it with the Gargoyle. And I was like, dude, we're so old. It would have to be a cinematic match at this point. But I wanted to do it as a joke. I wanted to get stunt doubles. And bad stunt doubles. Like, they don't even look like you.
Well, hey, who knows? Maybe it will become a reality sooner than later.
You never know, but I think that would be fun. Especially, I don't know if the Santinos are still doing back to the 80s, the Dynamite D tribute shows, but if they are, I think that would be the perfect place to do it because it's California and we're both, California. I freaked out when somebody told me that somebody from SoCal Uncensored or whatever put me on their all-time top 50 wrestlers from California list or whatever. And I was like, what? Like, that's okay. I'll take it. But what? I don't know.
You got a lot of press. I mean, that accounts for a lot.
I guess it does. When you reached out, it was actually Chris, I think, reached out. Thought it was cool that this is my first podcast ever. And I was all nervous because I went and bought a ring light and I've never done this before. So like I've done Zoom calls, but I've never done a podcast and it's fun. It's kind of neat to just talk about wrestling. I love talking wrestling. Still passionate about it, but yeah. So I appreciate you inviting me to be on your podcast.
No, truly the pleasure's all mine. I mean, it's great to have you on. I kind of broke in a little after the whole Slammers run, so it's like cool because I remember all you guys in the magazines, and I even tried to get my dad to take me to a Slammers show, but I want to say this was probably right after the whole DWO thing happened, so that never happened.
I know that Joey Ryan is not. I don't know. I know that like he's considered a sleazeball or whatever because of some stuff, but I've only met him once. And he told me the first indie show he ever went to was the Slammers show. And I only say that to say that I didn't realize until years later how much of an impact and an influence slammers had on the Southern California wrestling scene. And honestly, I believe that what you see now from the SoCal guys and AEW is, to me, that's, I feel like Slammers is like the seed that sprouted the Young Bucks and that sprouted PWG and all those things. And if it weren't for Slammers, you may not have had those things. And therefore, it's possible that you may not have AEW without Slammers.
I agree.
Which
I
is,
totally agree.
which then, getting back to your Darren question, because I also believe that Darren, more in California, more than anybody else in Slammers, I think Darren was the most impactful and influential and inspirational person, wrestler, trainer, friend, to come out of Slammers. And so I think that more than anybody, Darren deserves the credit for that style of wrestling that we now see in AEW. Good, bad, or indifferent. Now, there's some of the things I don't agree with, but I do believe that Darren had the biggest impact from 1989 until his passing in Southern California wrestling. I don't know, him and Rick Bassman. I mean, you can't. I mean, Rick Bassman did a lot too, and
Yeah, he did. He did a lot.
you can't take that away. But as far as like, yeah, Darren was right up there with that. I mean,
Well, if we're even going to break it down, there would have been no XPW without Darren.
nope.
I know Rob Black doesn't want to admit that, and that's a whole nother
I
story.
don't care about what Rob Black wants to admit. I don't care about Rob Black. The fact is, there's no XPW without Slammers.
Absolutely.
Look at it. Look at the originals. Look at the people. Look at them all. Did you talk to Billy? Did you know they wanted him to, like, he was under a mask at one point before he was the
Yeah,
Messiah.
he was.
And he didn't want to be the Messiah. Like that was a Rob Black Coke filled fantasy.
Yeah, it
whatever.
was.
But he didn't want to be.
Made it work.
Yeah, well, yeah, he did. And I remember him saying that they wanted him to be Jesus or something. Like they wanted a more explicit and a blasphemous version of what he became. But yeah, nah, he made it work. And for a while, he was one of the hottest guys in wrestling. Like, for that scene of what that style, the death match or the hardcore style. He was and had ECW been around, like really, like East Paul Heyman. I mean, imagine Billy and like take those guys and put them in and give Paul Heyman the pencil. That would have been way better than Rob Black's booking. Or I wasn't in the office. I don't know if it was Rob Black and Kevin. I like Kevin as a human being. I never liked him as a booker. That's just my opinion. Like him I mean, Kevin's a bright guy.
He's a very bright guy. I mean, I agree with you on the booking aspect with Kevin, but XPW, and I can say this personally, having assisted Rob for a while.
Oh, you worked there?
When he did the resurgence a couple years ago, but I left the night before the show because he didn't live up to promises that he promised me. And I'm not someone, I'd been around for a while. And even Darren told me if I ever meet Rob, make sure, you get everything up front.
Right.
And I could tell you for a fact, XPW wouldn't have been what it was without Kevin booking the arenas, getting
on the air,
and
the logistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And again, take anything away from. Look, think about this. So Kevin was involved with the Wrestling Society X project. He was involved with XPW. He do something with Lucha Underground too, or Lucha Vavoom, or some type of lucha show.
Yeah, he did some stuff out in Vegas for a while.
Yeah, no, Kevin's made his, and that's what's fascinating about all of us from Slammers. Most of us have made some form of impact in wrestling. Something. The ones that wanted to. Most of us have done something somehow, whether it's press, whether it's behind the scenes, whether it's influence and style. Like, for a bunch of nobodies who weren't connected, second generation guys, or weren't connected, or didn't have, Slammers made its mark on wrestling for sure. And yeah, there's no XPW without Darren. Rob Black was trying to buy ECW and couldn't. And so then he
bought SCCW. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, from Kevin and Darren.
Yeah,
right. It was Kevin and Darren's project.
Yeah, Patrick was involved.
Or not. Patrick Hernandez. Yeah, and he bought it.
And XPW almost didn't happen either because he was still hoping that the ECW connection was going to happen. He was going to work with Paul because he was just a mark for ECW.
Yeah, money mark, like so many. Yeah, still
so
is.
It is what it is there. I mean, on that whole thing.
Yeah, but yeah, I remember. No, you're right. No XPW without that MIT. And like I said, in my opinion, Jesus. Darren, like I told you earlier, Darren knew how to break down a headlock into intricate points. He knew how to break down everything. Like, technically, Darren was insanely gifted or insanely astute. If it wasn't a gift, it was definitely through his ability to break it down and look at it and then pick it apart and then put it back together. And he had a good mind for wrestling himself. Like, it wasn't just he had a really good mind for wrestling. His comedy stuff was funny too. People don't give him credit. I saw that match he had with New Jack. Where he made New Jack wrestle for the only time he's ever wrestled in his life. I had one conversation with New Jack because I don't know if you remember Angel from the Baldies tag team in ECW?
Yes.
Angel. So he lives in Wichita, Kansas now. And I've done shows with him. And I was helping book a promotion in Omaha briefly. And Angel wanted me to bring in New Jack so he could wrestle him. And so he just gives New Jack my phone number without telling me. And so New Jack calls me. And New Jack, because he's had so much brain injury, did not remember Darren in that match. But I did, and I brought it up. And New Jack was like wanting to come in. But the market that we had was not a hardcore market, so it wouldn't have worked. And we were family-friendly wrestling, not extreme.
Well, it's like Jesse Hernandez proves in SoCal that sells more tickets than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love Jesse. Jesse, God, I sometimes wish I could have trained with him. There's another guy who's brilliant. Who, if anybody had a big impact on, it was Slammers and Jesse. Jesse Hernandez, Bill Anderson, and Vern Langdon / Slammers. And then Darren.
I think Jesse and Bill were kind of tied into Slammers at one point.
Jesse wasn't. Bill was.
Jesse wasn't at all.
So what happened was Jesse Hernandez and Bill Anderson had a falling out. And so Bill needed a new place to train his students. And he left with his students and went to Slammers and was renting the ring. Because when Slammers first opened, it wasn't a wrestling school. It was just a place to rent a ring, and they had a museum. And they didn't have a promote. And where the Slammers Wrestling Federation promotion came from was the early people there had like cardboard belts and with tinfoil, and they were writing. They came up with, "We're Slammers Wrestling Federation. We're Slammers Wrestling Federation." And Vern was like, "All right, but if we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it seriously. I'm the boss, and you're gonna listen to me." And so he put his money behind it. He mortgaged his house,
Wow.
and he went back to work in Hollywood to fund it because he didn't want to. He needed the money, and then they ran it as a serious, legit wrestling promotion. Um, but when Bill Anderson and Louis Spicolli uh, when they pissed Vern off, Vern sent them packing. But no, Jesse was never affiliated with Slammers. Bill was,
Okay.
but
That's good to clear up that,
yeah, no, Jesse was never affiliated with Slammers. But nice guy, booked me. I got booked through Cincinnati Red because I called Jesse and reached out to him, and at the time Cincinnati Red was alive and was his booker, and told me to call him. And then they brought me in. They put me in a tag team match. And Mondo Guerrero was my agent. It was the first time I ever worked with an agent, like a backstage agent. That was a new experience. It was cool. It was fun. I had a great time. And that was one of them old Johnny Flores WWF rings, like from the 80s. And it was stiff as hell. Thank God I did trade at Slammers because I could handle a stiff ring. But yeah. And the ropes were taller than I was used to because what people don't know about the WWF rings, the reason why the ropes are so tall is because his dad used to take old boxing rings and just put 3 ropes on them. And the old rings were standard boxing ring ropes are 4.5 feet high. And wrestling ring ropes are supposed to be 4 feet high. Tradition, like your Paul Jones WCW old rings, NWA rings, Crockett Territory rings, 4 feet high, 16 inches between each rope. WWF are 4.5 feet. So WWE, excuse me. And that's why the WWE rings are so big too, because they're modeled after boxing rings. But anyway, I got to work in that ring, and it was the first time I got to bump in an old WWF ring. Well, no, the second time, because the XPW ring was an old Johnny Flores ring too. The with those goofy because I got to bump in that ring. Joe Romano had that ring before Rob Black had that ring. And so I got to bump in it in Bakersfield. The same ring that XPW had back in those days
Yeah.
was Joe Romano had it first.
And then I know Darren and Pat bought it.
Yep. But I bumped in it, and I didn't like it either. It was a crap ring. I hated those rings. I hate rings with springs in the middle of them. I like the Flexibeam rings better.
Alex Knight's ring had a spring in the middle too.
I hate those rings. They suck.
I know, it was an old Paul Jones ring actually.
Fuck those rings. I like rings that have, sorry for cussing, but I like the rings that have the Flexibeam style. The first time I ever bumped in those, I was like, oh my God, wrestling can be nice. Jesus. Darren had never bumped in a Flexibeam ring until he came out to see me in Kansas. And I took him to a show. And he wasn't used to the ring. You know how when you run in a Flexibeam ring, you take that first step and then the ring kind of goes down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it comes back up. And he had never ran the ropes in one of those. And so he takes a step and the ring goes down and he's not expecting it to come back up like this. And he takes the second step and almost blew out his knee.
Oh.
Right before the show. But he, yeah. So, yeah. But to get back to your original statement, yes, Darren to me there's no, like, Southern California today is still influenced. Santino Brothers is Slammers. It is not, because Mongo Santino is a Slammers graduate.
Yeah, he is. I think he was trained by Carlos
and Edgar.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's a Slammers graduate. But Vern had a big influence on him too. And so is Angel, the exotic the heck was his name? Angel, the hardcore homo.
Yeah.
He's a Slammers graduate.
He is.
Yeah. Vern, when the funny thing about Mongo is they brought Mongo in originally at Slammers. His original gimmick was El Mongol, and he was the new gargoyle. And Vern wanted me to, I almost came back to wrestle at the new Slammers, and I almost came back to wrestle Mongo. He wanted a Mongo versus gargoyle match. And I almost did it, but then I didn't. because we had another fight. Vern and I had another fight about Hillary Clinton, I think, or I don't know what it was about. I don't even remember, but it was a fight, and we didn't speak for another 3 years. We would have fights and just not speak, be pissed off at each other. But yeah, man, Darren was Jesus. Slammers and Darren and Jesse Hernandez, Bill Anderson. That's Southern California, and Rick Bassman.
Well, and you know what? I would say there would be maybe no John Cena today if it wasn't for Darren. That's a safe assumption to actually say.
Yep.
Because he was trained by Tim and got his start there, got his feet wet.
Tim got trained by Darren.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. Or he would have had to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know, it's too bad. I think technically John Cena would have been better going to Jesse than I think Jesse is an amazing trainer. But I don't know.
Jesse's a great guy, but I know, and we're hoping to have him on, but I know he's done one of Kris's old podcasts, and I know he's a little bit, sometimes gets very discouraged with today's crew, and he feels like no one wants to listen anymore. And this is a guy who's worked with everybody in the business.
Yeah, he and I have the same. I got back, I did one show as a manager. They wanted me to manage. So the proper name for the type of gimmick I did, Zu the Gargoyle, the insider term for that is called a goon gimmick. It's the old school term, goon gimmick. And so they hired me to work in the Midwest in near Junction City, Kansas, Abilene, or some enterprise, some small little town in Kansas. Cowboy James Storm was the main event, and they wanted me to work with this guy who did a goon gimmick because I did him and I understood it. And the guy shows up late. He smells like alcohol and cigarettes, and he was mad because I wasn't animated enough with his gimmick. And I was like, if I'm animated, it takes away the attention from you. So I was trying to approach it more like how Gary Hart used to stand on the sidelines with all those monsters. And he wanted me to be more Jimmy Hartish. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Not for what you are. And so we fought about that, me and this kid. And then he's supposed to be, could you imagine if you went to see the Gargoyle wrestle? Let's say Gargoyle versus Iron Mike Earhart. We got intermission. And Gargoyle's out there with Dre Beats headphones on, a fanny pack, some slides, shorts, and I'm dancing and talking to people. How would you feel as a fan if you saw Gargoyle doing that?
Totally ruin everything.
Correct. James Storm comes back in the back and he's like, hey, your client is out there with his headphones on and his fanny pack on and his slides, and kayfabe, motherfucker, kayfabe. And he's like, what are you going to do about it? And I was like, there's nothing I can do. This kid doesn't respect me. He's like, I'll talk to him. He literally lectured this kid all throughout the rest of the show. And then we went back and drank with him at the hotel. And he spent like a good 2 hours lecturing this kid. I didn't work with him ever again. And that was my last time even dipping my toe into pro wrestling. I got so, getting back to your point about Jesse being disillusioned or disappointed with the modern kids, that's how I felt. I got back into it and I was like, these kids think they know everything. I don't want to, I'm done. Yeah. So I've seen wrestling shows. I checked out AEW once, and I'll support the local indies when they come in. I'll buy a ticket and hang out, and pay and sit and play the part of a fan and cheer for the good guy and boo the bad guy. But I'm not going to get involved with it because the kids today they're the young bucks. Yeah. And I don't want to be, I'm not a young buck. I'm a Slammers graduate.
Yeah, I was there, part of a show where they totally disrespected Darren too. And I just thought, a couple other guys were there and said, hey, if this was 10 years prior, they wouldn't be in the business anymore after that night.
No, and if I had been there and I got booked with them, I would have shot so hard on them, they would have cried their pants. I would have beat the living bejesus out of them. And I'd do it today. That's why I sided with CM Punk on that whole thing with AEW.
I did too.
Still do. I watched his last interview and I agree with him. So, and I mean, I don't know Punk, but I know his trainer. I know his sensibilities. And yeah, I don't know. I'm happy to see people have work. I'm happy that there's money being made, but money mark wrestling has never been. I've never been a fan of money mark wrestling.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm an old guy, but you know, I love wrestling too much to betray it.
I agree. I feel the same way. It just gets aggravating sometimes. So, like you said, sometimes it's better just to sit at the sidelines. It just
Now,
saves sanity.
Jeff loves the Young Bucks. Jeff Lindbergh.
Oh, really?
Yes, he loves the Young Bucks, and Jeff loves all that. Like that's one thing he and I disagree on. He loves that flippity flop, hip hop, zipping through the air, doesn't make sense, acrobatic stunt wrestling, and I do not. To me, it looks like a video game. I call it video game wrestling because like you play a video game and you just put moves together for no rhyme or reason, and then the power meter goes down, and that to
Yeah.
me is what the Young Bucks do, and what Kenny Omega does. And I don't appreciate that style of wrestling. I like it. MJ. I mean, I don't appreciate his cussing, but I like MJF's approach to wrestling more than I like the Young Bucks' approach to wrestling.
I
And
do too.
so yeah, I'm kind of glad I left California when I did, as far as wrestling goes, because if I had been around, yeah, I'd have wrestled them. I'd beat the piss out of them. Yeah, in a safe way. I wouldn't have hurt him. I wouldn't have killed him, but yeah, stretch, sure. We all knew how to stretch coming out of Slammers. Every last one of us. Well, I can't. I wasn't there. Like, I can't say that Pete Hatfield knew how to stretch somebody, or who was the other guy? We had a kid Craig Bockwinkel. I don't know if he knew how to stretch people, but all of us that graduated from Slammers and took it seriously, Jeff could put a hold on you and tie you up in knots. I could put a hold on you and tie you in knots. Darren could. Edgar could. Carlos, Ed Ferrara. Yeah, we'd tie you in knots for days because Vern wanted us to know that stuff.
It's a lost art.
Yeah, man, it is, but it's a different time too. It's more oriented towards corporate TV stuff, and you can't do that now like you did then. So it's a different business.
But I think even people, and this is just my opinion, I think people that are in WWE kind of don't respect the traditions anymore either. Say what you will about Vince McMahon and everything going on right now, but I think that old school approach of respect and doing what's good for business it's gone.
It's funny about Vince. Do you know what? So when my first trip to California, Vern had a gift basket with a family. It was a Christmas gift basket from the McMahon family, and it had a picture of Linda, Vince, and the kids. And it was on his. He had a grand piano, and it was on his grand piano, and I was so impressed by that. But Vern told me about Vince's extracurricular activities in 1992 when I was 18 years old, way before. So this is nothing new to, like, when it came out, I was like, oh, they're finally catching him. But it's like people in California knew about Joey Ryan before the rest of the world knew about Joey Ryan.
It was very well known for a long time.
And it was very well known about Vince. Like, it's not new. Pat Patterson, everybody knew about that. Like Mel Phillips, people knew about that. If you were in the business, you knew these things. It's just now getting it to where everybody else knows it.
Well, and there's still people in the company there too, I think, where I think stuff's going to come out, and I don't know if they're going to.
There's more people that are going to, yeah. It's
even
not over. And
if you're running things now, showing their face, all the time, I have a feeling there's stuff's going to come out there too.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And
I wouldn't have brought Brock Lesnar back.
Yeah, I don't know, but they're mentioning his name, so
I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have brought him back. I wouldn't, and then, yeah, I don't know. I'm not an insider, but I did have some insight into these allegations what, 30 years ago? So it was known.
Yeah, it's been out there for a long time, a lot of things too, publicly.
But that's the same thing with the Nickelodeon thing, right? I knew about that too. Uh, not Nickelodeon per se, but about the Hollywood grooming and the pedophilia and all that stuff. That I was supposed when I was 12 years old, my mother took me to an acting agency in New York, and I was supposed to go to an acting school to do child commercials. And now that I know what I know about all that child acting stuff, I am so grateful that I never got involved with that. You know, no thanks. I'm good.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
I know pro wrestling and Hollywood, the true Hollywood.
Music. I speak, yeah, because we talked about CDs real quick before I go. I put out a CD back in the day.
Oh, cool.
Yep. It's called Rip Nice, No Secrets. Still on Spotify, still on. You can actually Google it, Rip Nice, No Secrets, and it was sold in Walmart for a while. Uh, I was nominated for a music award through the Kansas City Music Awards for Best Male Rap Vocalist. I didn't win it, but I was nominated.
That's awesome.
It's a rap album. I designed the cover, and it just goes to show that when you're a creative person, you find ways to be creative, I guess. But yeah, the music industry is no different. It's corrupted and scary, and we're finding that out now with P Diddy. You know, but yeah, it's a weird business. I learned about the reason why I knew about the music business was through Vern, because he was into music and he taught me about the music industry. So I got a heck of an education from him. You know, so I mean, out of all I used to tell people I was trained by Vern more than anybody, because yeah, Darren showed me a lot of the technical stuff and Jeff showed me a lot of stuff, but who taught me the business? Who taught me the mind of the business? It was Vern, for sure.
And it's been it's been great to get insight on all this too, because there's a lot of stuff that people either have misinformation of, me included.
We haven't even touched the surface. I got so many freaking stories and so much. I held back because this is our first conversation.
Well, yeah, we have to do a second one, and I know Kris will absolutely join us for that. And you guys could also talk about your first meeting of Kris being one of the few, sometimes going to Slammers shows where it was him and a few other people sitting in the front row.
I don't think I've ever met him in person, or if I have, if we've met, I don't remember it. I remember when I first saw him was on the XPW shows as an announcer, and I thought he was great. I thought, man, this guy sounds like I thought his voice was good. I thought he should have got signed to be a commentator somewhere. I was impressed with him.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. He actually almost started with Slammers too.
I didn't like his the Mexican colleague that he had that did commentary with him, because I didn't understand. His accent was so thick, it was hard for me to understand him. I thought it was comical, but I thought if I wanted to promote a show, the point of the commentator, color or play-by-play, is to could sell the story, is to sell the show.
Yeah.
If I can't understand you, you're not selling the show. So I didn't agree with that. But man, I thought Kris was freaking awesome. Like his voice.
Yes, absolutely.
Jesus. There's very few people in the business that have, especially in the minor leagues, especially in the independents. There have come up more since, but in those days, there was like, even Dave Prazak wasn't as good as, I didn't think was as good on commentary as Kris was. Voice sounding, the tone, the delivery, the cadence. Nah, man, I thought Kris was awesome.
He's great.
Yeah. I mean, geez.
And Darren gave him his start too.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely do a part 2, because we'll bring Kris on next time, and we'll continue this, and we'll go on more about slammers, more about your career, maybe talk even a little bit more about SCCW and how you're one of the original guys in SCCW, which led to XPW.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about anything and everything pro wrestling. Oh, before we go, I want you to get your plugs in. Do you want to plug your music or anything else?
Well, the only thing about the music, if you're interested, it is hip hop, and it's Rip Nice, RIPNICE. The album is called No Secrets. It's been out legit since when did we put it? I put it out myself independently in 2017, but it's still available. It's still out there. You can still listen to it if you want to. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on all the major music platforms. Um, I don't get rich off of it, but I do get royalties because um, I wrote it, I produced it, I made the beats, the music, the graphics. The only thing I didn't do on this album was engineer it because I'm a horrible studio engineer. So that's the only thing I didn't do. Um, and it is niche music, just like my wrestling career was niche wrestling. Um, but yeah, that's it. So yeah, I look forward to a round two, and we'll chat and talk more about wrestling. And I mean, we could talk about anything wrestling related if you want. I'll talk about current events. We could talk about 80s, 70s, 90s.
Do it.
California. I'll talk to you about anything wrestling, and I'm happy to talk about everybody that I knew at Slammers, or heck, we didn't get into Richie Dagger, we didn't get into Lobo, we didn't get into uh, Samoan Kid, who I had some really epic matches. We beat the Jesus out of each other. Like I got at least 5 concussions from him alone. No, but there's a lot of people at Slammers we can talk about. You know, that'd
We'll
be
definitely
fun.
do that. We'll have to talk about White Trash Johnny Webb and
You know, one funny story, and I'll stop. So he got mad when we left. Pete got Malad got he was called Pete Malloy back then. He got mad, and then he was Spider. He was Pete Malloy, then he was Pete Webb, and then he was Spider Webb before he left Slammers. He was mad that we finished promoting at Strongbow Stadium, and we went from Strongbow Stadium to uh, the SOCIAS, the Sherman Oaks Center for Enriched Studies, the school that Kevin went to. And he felt like it was a step down and that we were going backwards. And he made the mistake of telling that to me, a Vern guy. And I was like, who the heck is this new kid bitching about where we wrestle? You know, when I started, we wrestled in Slammers in the tiny little warehouse in front of 20 people or 2 people. We once did a show in front of 2 paying customers, and this guy's mad because we're not at Strongbow. So I told Vern that, and Vern, of course, chewed him out. And then I saw him. We had wrestling training the next time I saw him, and he decided to go off and beat the piss out of me. So I waited and let him, and then I got my receipts in, and I beat the piss out of him back. And after that, we were fine.
You know, deep down, Webb's a good guy.
Oh yeah, no, I like him. I like him, but that's how we settled it. He was pissed and wanted to get his aggression out. Okay, but then I get to go back. Like, fine, you know.
If you're gonna beat the piss out of me, hey man.
Yeah, I'm fine with it, but just know
Yeah.
that there's one coming back. I don't care.
Yeah.
As long as it was fine. That's good. You know, that's how we did it at Slammers. We weren't light. We weren't soft. You know. But yeah. I look forward to talking to you again, sir.
I do too. And once we end this, there are a couple quick things I want to touch base with you on.
Okay.
All right. And that is a wrap. Until next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.